Screw it. Let's just go live, shall we? Let me know if you guys can hear me all right. Welcome to the Shillan and Duffy show recap for UFC 278, Usman versus Edwards 2. I'm your host this evening, flying solo. As you can see, I'm Ben Duffy, Sherdog senior editor. Keith is indisposed this evening, so what you get is twice as much of me talking and twice as wide a panorama of my living room and office space. I made the joking comments in the comment section here. Anything interesting happened at the fights tonight? Let's jump right in. With less than a minute left in a fight in which he was frankly being dominated and looked, for lack of a better term, like he'd kind of checked out, Leon Edwards lands a picture-perfect left high kick and completely ices your now former welterweight champ, Kamaru Usman. In most people's opinion, at worst, the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. It is a knockout of the year candidate. It is an upset of the year candidate. It immediately makes Edwards a fighter of the year candidate. You know, if you're at all familiar with the Shillan and Duffy show, Keith and I both kind of live in the moment. Him probably a little bit more than me, but I'm going to jump right in here and ask big questions. Where does this fall in among your most shocking UFC title fight outcomes ever? I know that in terms of strict betting odds, this was not Sarah GSP, this was not Pena versus Nunes, but in terms of just how shocking the actual outcome was, I'm struggling to think of something that surprised me more, because for once I kind of agreed with the UFC booth. I did have the sound on for this one, and the guys at the table were kind of saying that Edwards looked like he was not quitting, but settling for a decision loss rather than really go for the finish that he must have known he needed. Dean Thomas absolutely eviscerated him. You know, Dean Thomas, as the floor guy, just said when a fighter isn't making eye contact with his cornerman between rounds, it's because he's ashamed, it's because he's quit. And I'm not faulting Dean at all for this. I think everybody in attendance and everybody watching on TV kind of felt the same way. And then out of nowhere comes an unbelievable knockout, an unbelievable come from behind victory. Let's talk about it technically for a moment, because speaking technically, what a gorgeous piece of work. He feints with the left to kind of draw Usman out, draw him to defend a split second earlier. And I'm sure you're probably watching replays of that knockout now, or you're going to be seeing them endlessly over the coming week. Watch Edwards' head and his shoulders, because they do not move a millimeter as his leg comes up from the waist and goes right upside Usman's jaw and head. Just a beautiful, untelegraphed head kick. Scott McCrate says, same shock level as Weidman Silva. Not unbelievable, but pretty damn shocking. I find this, like, at least I personally, I find this more shocking than Weidman Silva, because in Weidman Silva, I'm not saying I picked Weidman to knock Silva out the way he did, even though I did pick him to win. But my thought was, if Silva keeps clowning like this, Weidman could make him pay. And it just so happened that he made him pay in amazing fashion. Here, the last thing I expected was Edwards to come out of nowhere with a head kick, one-shot knockout. Unbelievable. Keith Shillan, too busy to get on the stick with me, but apparently not too busy to have jokes in the comment section. Hey, Keith, how's it going? Early stoppage. Killing me. Plenty of guys, are coming up with other suggestions here. Boss thinks Sarah GSP is the most shocking. Kyle Lawheed, very impressed by Rocky's gas tank. I have to say I am too. Both Keith and I on the preview thought that, yeah, Edwards has very good cardio, but Usman has top shelf cardio, weaponized cardio. The 4th and 5th rounds are generally his wheelhouse when he's not taking on Colby Covington, who has even better cardio. And I think Keith predicted a 3rd round finish. I predicted a 4th round finish for Usman. And I had resigned myself to being wrong about that. And Edwards just kind of riding a more conservative game plan to maybe a less painful or less humiliating decision loss. And I could not have been more wrong. So wrong, happy to be wrong about it. You know, I don't have any personal emotional stake in either of these guys. I have thought that Usman has been a great champ, but you know, Edwards, it's hard not to feel good for the guy. You know, you've been introduced a little bit to his story over the course of this week, or if you've been following him on this 10-fight unbeaten run, you know, you've gotten pieces of it before. You know, came from very little and has really been given nothing by the UFC. The UFC slow rolled him to the point that it was getting ridiculous on his way to a title shot. The reasons for that are understandable. Most of his fights do not end this excitingly. And while he exuded some charisma on the mic at the end of the fight tonight, he normally is one of the less energetic personalities in the UFC. And he's got that Jamaica by way of Midlands thing where he is very high on the list of native English speaking fighters that I wish I had subtitles for. So I guess we'll find out, you know, how easy a sell he is as champ. The question now is what's next? I think the biggest loser tonight of the title fight, other than Usman, is the rest of the queue that's waiting at welterweight, because all of a sudden the upcoming fights that we have, such as what do we got? We got Sean Brady versus Bilal Muhammad. That's going to be a whole different thing now. People like Shavkat Rakhmonov that are coming off of wins. You know, there's different, you know, there are different implications. Obviously, the Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz fight coming up, that went from pretty much a given that it was a title eliminator, at least for one man. Dana White had said earlier this week that, yeah, pretty much you can expect Chimaev to get a title shot if he beats Diaz. All of a sudden, all those things change. Let me know in the chat here, and I'm going to get as many of these up as possible, but since it's just me, I'm kind of the producer and the host and the guest, so I'll get as many of these comments up, but these guys have fought twice. They're 1-1, and the man who was just dethroned is probably the most dominant champ in the sport. If ever there was a time for an immediate rematch, is this it? Let me know what you think should be next for your new champ, Leon Edwards. If you think it should be an immediate rematch with Usman, say so. If not, let me know what you think should be next. Kyle Johnson says, Chimaev dusts Diaz and waits for the winner. I kind of expect that that's going to be the case. I kind of agree that that's what will happen. If you think what should happen is something different, say so. Kyle Lougheed, speaking terrible things into existence here, says Masvidal might be the one guy coming off 3 losses who gets a title fight. You shut your whorish mouth. Scott McCrate, rematch in London. I mean, Edwards has probably earned that, hasn't he? And considering just what London has become over the course of the last couple cards we've had, there's such a reliable source of really unmatched crowd energy. Imagine what it would be like for Edwards. Maybe like if there's some situation that you could put together, some arrangement, some alignment of the stars that could make a star out of Leon Edwards, having him headline in the rematch in London is probably it. I'm all about that. Punches and Bunches says, if Usman doesn't want time off, it's an instant rematch. That's worth taking into consideration here. I mean, I can't imagine that Usman's going to say, no, I don't want this back right away. I'm going to take, 9 months off. You go defend against someone else, because then there's always the possibility that he never gets to get a chance to get it back against Edwards. That doesn't strike me as matching up with his extremely competitive personality, but he just got knocked out really bad and had never been before. So we'll see what he does. As the champion, says Alan McDonald, Leon deserves the main event in a UK card. I absolutely agree with you, but as Clint Eastwood said in Unforgiven, deserves got nothing to do with it. I say that absolutely applies to UFC booking and matchmaking. Just deserves got nothing to do with it, but I'd love to see it. Technical Will says Usman was winning. Usman was absolutely winning. I mean, Edwards won the first round. He had that just shocking trip and underhooks takedown, and then really was dominant on the ground for the most of the rest of the first round. That was an eye opener. And side note that hopefully I'll remember to come back to, I already thought Leon Edwards was the best British MMA wrestler in the history of the sport. Coming into this, I was doubly sure of it once he took Usman down so effortlessly for the first like real clean takedown of Usman's UFC career. And I was prepared to kind of talk about that in the wake of an Edwards loss. But yeah, Edwards won the first round, and then he got dominated from there on out. He had a few little moments. You know, there were a few glimmers of hope in each of the succeeding rounds where he'd catch Usman clean with something, kind of make him shake his head and reset. But those were little islands of hope in pretty much a wash of dominance by Usman. That's why this finish was so shocking to me. Because if anything, the fifth round seemed that we were getting fewer of those moments because Edwards was kind of like shrinking into himself and just fighting to survive. I don't typically try to get in fighters' heads. I think it's a moot point. It's a fruitless pursuit. But now you just have to wonder, was Edwards playing possum to some extent? Was he trying to get Usman to let his guard down? Was he trying to let Usman think that Edwards had checked out? I have no idea. I don't want to credit him with that kind of gamesmanship. Maybe he just dug deep. Whatever the case was, he shocked everybody except apparently himself. Kyle Johnson says if Patty and or Molly win at MSG, he could see Dana using champ Leon as an excuse to stack them all in a London pay-per-view with Till and others. Yes, that's the best possible outcome right there. Is you get Edwards in the main event in a rematch with Usman. You stack the rest of the card with British stars, Paddy Pimblett, Molly McCann, Darren Till. You have another guaranteed sellout. You have another guaranteed memorable night of moments that they'll be able to use, in marketing these people going forward. Just floating through, point something out. Usman's record is going to be Colby, Masvidal, Burns, Masvidal, Colby, Edwards. Edwards fought the same three people for years. A lot of dominant champs end up doing that. Look at Alexander Volkanovski's recent run, where he's just they're desperately looking for a way for him not to keep fighting the same people over and over again. It turns into that in a lot of in a lot of divisions. This is what I was going to ask if Usman won. Is Leon the second best person in the division? And getting ready to do matchmaking, again, if Leon lost, I was going to say Leon versus Colby is the perfect next matchup because neither of them has an easy way back to fight Usman. So there they take care of each other instead of accidentally knocking off somebody, like a Rockmanov that's streaking and is a new face. We don't have to worry about that now. Now we just worry about immediate rematch or not immediate rematch. If you're familiar at all with these recaps and you're familiar with me, I'm usually against immediate title rematches unless there was something controversial about the first meeting. And here, there really wasn't. I saw some people on Twitter kind of squawking about fence grabs and glove grabs and eye pokes. I'm not condoning cheating outright, but these are two guys that just were really, really trying. And I think the exchange of fouls more or less balanced out in the end. Marcus Mustard says, let's go UFC. Let's go Salt Lake. As someone who lived in Utah for like 15 years, both in Salt Lake Valley and in Utah Valley, which is like 50 miles south of it. And that's where BYU and stuff are. I agree. It was great to see Salt Lake get a packed house, get a card that, while it certainly had moments of lull, ended about as sensationally as you're likely to see a UFC card end this year. So, good for Salt Lake. In terms of quality on paper, they kind of got the day old bread card of UFC pay-per-views so far this year, but at least at the top, it turned into something pretty good. Cool Panda was envisioning Usman winning and then Khamzat next. Yeah, I think that's what most of us were picturing. I think that's what Dana was picturing. Speaking of which, do you think Dana White is happy right now with the outcome of this fight? Do you think with a minute left in the fight, you pause reality and you say to Dana, okay, this can either end the way it looks like it's going to end with Usman taking a 49-46 or 49-45 decision and moving on to probably fighting Khamzat Chimaev around the end of the year or early next year, or you could have Leon Edwards score one of the most shocking upsets in UFC title history. Which do you think Dana chooses? Does he take the continued dominance of Usman, or does he take a British star getting the title? Which do you think? Alan McDonald doesn't think Dana's happy. It's hard for me to say because Usman has not always been his like favorite son either. You know, this isn't like, you know, someone like, I don't know, Max Holloway or Khabib losing. Cool Panda, Leon won because he cheated 30 times. Agree or disagree? Again, I sounded off on this a minute ago. I think both guys, you know, skirted the rules a little bit. There were some glove grabs. There were some fence grabs. I don't know if he won because he cheated. If you think he would have been finished without some of that stuff, then I guess so, because we never would have gotten to the moment where he launched the infamous head kick. But I mean, the head kick wasn't cheating. That was just about as clean as you get. Dana looked happy as fuck when wrapping the belt around Edwards' waist. He certainly did in the moment. This was not him, you know, strapping the belt on like Tyron Woodley, where you can just tell he's, I mean, it wasn't a belt, but his most miserable moment ever was handing the Tough Trophy to Roy Nelson as Roy's just like rubbing his gut and like shaking his greasy mullet. But, you know, wrapping the belt around Tyron Woodley was probably the least happy I've ever seen Dana with a champion. Jester ATP, I don't think we've seen you here before. Welcome aboard. Dana's happy. Record gate, saved a lackluster card. Yeah, lackluster up until the Rockhold fight. And you know what? I think he likes watching invincible people get humbled in the sense that it keeps the UFC's brand bigger than any individual fighter. I kind of agree with you there. Just floating through. I think he takes an English star just because now he won't have to deal with people saying the main event was boring. I didn't even think it was boring. Like I was entertained. Just, but yeah, a new face makes all the difference in the world. Shall we move on from this one? There were 11 other fights tonight. Just oddly, there's almost less to talk about in light of this upset than if Usman had just won. Because if Usman had just won, the matchmaking, I think, gets more complicated going forward. Here, it's like, well, that was shocking. I guess we're probably going to see him run it back. And it kind of, it circumvents a lot of the other discussion we could have. Usman milked that kick just a bit. Yeah, he's a guy looking for every edge. It's the Daniel Cormier towel pushing down thing, you know. I think you can count on one hand the truly top level fighters that would be above, you know, doing something that skirts legality or gives them some tiny advantage. That's, you know, that's just the way these people are wired. Let's move on from there. I mean, if we need to circle back to this fight later, we definitely will. But your co-main event was almost guaranteed to be weird, and doggone it, was it ever. Paulo Costa versus Luke Rockhold. I joked ahead of this that I had a hard time picking who was going to win because of all the red flags. On the one hand, you have Luke Rockhold, who's coming back after 3 years away, after leaving the UFC on a string of bad knockout losses, is now 37. Just it was hard to have any faith in him. And then you had Paulo Costa, who had given us a double barrel blast of leaving his longtime gym to basically train with his own team, which tends to turn out really poorly for people not named Amanda Nunes, and also fired his manager in favor of his girlfriend. That's just that's a Mike. That's 2/3 of a Mike Perry hat trick right there. But it turned out a dominant performance by Costa, punctuated by moments of Rockhold, just showing flashes of brilliance here and there. This was a terrible fight. It was a terrible, great fight, or a great, terrible fight. Yes, it was exciting. Yes, into the third round, even leading up to Rockhold's bizarre rub my blood on your face moment, it gave me moment after moment where I was like, I cannot believe this is happening in a UFC co-main event in 2022. But tactically, strategically, it was a terrible fight. It was worse than Griffin Bonner. And Griffin Bonner was as exciting as it was because it was so untechnical. By the end of the fight, it was two really tired guys basically taking turns swinging at the other while the other guy had his hands down. This was that fight by the beginning of the second round. Like, defense went out the window. By the third round, Rockhold was like waiting 10 full seconds in between launching a spinning attack or flying attack. It was a terrible fight, and it was exciting for that reason. It had all the weirdness. Somebody in the Sherdog editorial Slack said it was like a recent Diaz fight without the Diaz. And I completely agree. It was Nick Diaz starting to clown around against Anderson Silva because it was less embarrassing to clown than to just get beat up while actually trying. It was one of those fights. It was Nate versus Edwards. It was just one guy getting washed and pulling one huge moment of offense out of his ass at the last possible moment. It was completely a Diaz fight without the Diaz. Rockhold frankly fared better than I expected. I expected him to get knocked out in the first round, and for a minute it looked like he would be. I mean, he got rung up. He was bleeding profusely from his nose by the middle of the first round, but he has underrated and uncoachable toughness to him. There's just no quit in the guy. Some thoughts here. Kyle Lawheed says, Luke can still move like an athlete. Don't know what to make of that fight. Don't make anything of that fight, because we're going to get to matchmaking in a few minutes here for these guys. Obviously, on the one side, Rockhold retired, so that's easy. But I'm coming in low, like under the tree level, under the radar with Costa coming forward, because I said on the preview, Costa can prove almost nothing here. There was almost nothing he could do in this fight to raise his stock. He's coming in as a huge favorite over a guy that's such an unknown quantity at this point in his career that, I mean, what could Costa do? If he kicked Rockhold's face off or punched it off in 90 seconds, well, that's no more than expected. Like, he's not riding back to a title eliminator based off of that. The only thing he could really prove is that, okay, yes, after the weird fiasco against Vettori, yes, Paulo Costa can make 185 pounds and go on to fight without the wheels completely falling off his wagon. He did that. I mean, this fight was kind of deliberately paced. It felt like it was furiously paced, I think, just because it was so sloppy. But he was able to fight at this pace for 3 rounds. And physically, I mean, he looked shredded. He looked physically as good as he has at any point in his career. I think the UFC booth even mentioned he normally looks a little water bloated coming into the cage. Not going to speculate on why, but it's kind of a known thing about him. Here, he really didn't. And if that means he has somehow mysteriously gotten his weight cut better managed under the guidance of his bespoke team that he surrounded himself with and his girlfriend, more power to him. But yeah, you guys let me know what you think should be next for Paulo Costa. A couple people have pointed out Costa's contract is up. You wonder if if he re-signs with the UFC or goes to PFL or something, the UFC, I don't think, is terribly invested in keeping their talent away from PFL. When the PFL was WSOF, it was almost explicitly the AAA New York, and it felt as though they had a fairly cordial relationship with him. I mean, Ali Abdelaziz was the man behind the throne. He is the biggest manager in the UFC by roster size, and then they had the same broadcast partners. But even now that it's PFL, I don't think the UFC is bent on keeping Treasure away from PFL. The question to me is whether the UFC thinks Bellator would sign him. Bellator desperately needs 185 pounders for its new champ, Johnny Eblen, for Gegard Mousasi, who has been around so long and has fought absolutely everybody. I think if the UFC is worried that Bellator will sign Costa, they'll be more likely to sign him back up. Kyle Johnson says Costa didn't look like a top 10 fighter in there. I completely agree. I don't think he looked like a top 10 fighter either. I think he looked like a borderline top 15 fighter. I think most of the guys in the top 15, even ones that he fought before, would have kind of lit him up tonight. And I don't know if that's just him fighting down to the level of his competition, but he ran a lot of undue risk against the guy in Rockhold that seemed to be largely washed. Like, Rockhold's kicks still looked good. And his kicks were his first and best weapon, but he used to be a fantastic grappler, and Costa out-grappled him in his fair share of the exchanges on the ground, if not most of them. He was just faster to the right position, had the counters, hurt Rockhold, took his back. Rockhold seemed washed, and Costa still gave him just way too many chances to win. So yeah, throw in the chat what you want to see out of Paulo Costa. Michelle Pereira, you're a funny man, boss. James Scott wants to see Costa versus Andre Muniz. I don't hate that. Muniz is a little higher ranked than the people I was thinking of. I'm thinking of like the Marc-Andre Barrio, Anthony Hernandez winner, Punahele Soriano, maybe the winner of Chidi Njokuani and Gregory Rodriguez. So in other words, somebody who's outside the edges of the top 15, kind of those 16 through 25 guys that are coming off a win or two, but none of them are on big, long winning streaks where you run the risk of Costa derailing a serious future contender on his way up. And Muniz has a little too much of a streak going, and I think is about to break into the top 10. But if you're like, okay, this guy's the real deal, let's test him for real, then yeah, throw him in there against Costa. A couple of people have said Dricus du Plessis. Kyle Lawheed says GM3. I don't hate that either. And it's to the point where Gerald Meerschaert has earned that kind of marquee matchup. He's a guy that's just kind of labored in the trenches for so long that he is coming up on, I believe he's either tied for first or he's like one behind Anderson Silva for the most finishes at middleweight in UFC history. So if you find yourself surprised to hear those two names next to each other, Gerald Meerschaert and Anderson Silva, it's because you, like me, have kind of been sleeping on his quietly impressive legacy. Will Costa become the new Romero at middleweight? I sure hope not, because what Romero became, it's not like he even became a gatekeeper. He didn't become like a Joseph Benavidez or a John Fitch that was just going to stay there at number 2 or number 3 and swat away all your contenders. Costa, Romero became more of like this whirlpool of suck where he delivered not terribly exciting fights. It just kind of kept fouling up the kind of fouling up the ladder of contention for several years longer than he needed to. I was really happy when he went to Bellator. Did Costa pass his blood test, or will they find the secret juice? Sometimes I just think Costa's kind of like crazy and dumb. But when I see the way he trolls on Twitter, I think there may be some of the self-awareness and crazy like a foxness to him, because him joking about injecting secret juice and then coming out looking like he did is pretty much troll genius. If he comes out clean as a whistle from all this, Uh, that's going to be pretty awesome. Okay, Cool Panda mentioning. I tweeted this. Why is middleweight this cesspool of weirdly sexual late fight and post fight interactions? You got Izzy dry humping Costa. You've got Yoel Romero kissing Rockhold. Now you've got Rockhold rubbing his bloody face on Costa. It's this weird love triangle of inappropriate interactions. I am, yeah, it makes me it makes me uncomfortable, and I know that's a me problem. Patty and Costa are quite the duet. They are, yeah. Costa and almost anybody is going to be comedy gold, I think. Uh, Anderson and Weidman also kissed. Anderson Silva, for a long time, the only interesting thing about his title reign was how affectionate he was with his victims after he beat them. I mean, with Chael Sonnen, he stopped at just inviting him to a barbecue. I think because he knew, Chael, of course, is a rock ribbed Republican from Oregon and doesn't go in with jujitsu or kissing men. But with everyone else, he's very, 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 very friendly. What a charmer. Bring Strickland in. Strickland, yeah, definitely. Strickland getting starched by Pereira was, I hate to say it, but kind of the best thing that could happen to the middleweight top 10 over the next year or so. Any other thoughts on Costa versus Rockhold before we move on? I'm telling you guys, once we get south of these top 3 fights, we're going to start blowing through these really quick. It's going to be mostly one-liners and shit talking, and I'm trusting you guys, my A team, to help me hold things up here. Because, like I said, this thing was desolation, at least on paper, outside of the top 3 fights, and for the most part, that's what it delivered. Let's move on to your feature fight of the evening, a bantamweight matchup between Jose Aldo and Merab Dvalishvili. Merab, of course, wins via unanimous decision, gets a 130-27 and 229-28. I see a lot of people upset with the decision on Twitter. So you guys in the chat, tell me who you thought won the fight, or if you were actually scoring it round by round, how you scored it. Because I scored it 29-28 myself. I gave Aldo the first round. I gave Merab the second and third. A lot of the comments I saw on Twitter just kind of had to do with, well, Merab didn't do anything but mash him into the cage for those last 2 rounds and knee him in the thigh. And I would agree that doesn't make for a dominant round, but in each of those rounds, it was more than what Aldo did back to him. Aldo exploding with like 1 or 2 solid punches once or twice around is just simply outweighed by 3 minutes of Merab kneeing him dozens of times in the leg. It wasn't pretty. And if you were hoping for something spectacular, if you have a place in your heart for Aldo, and if you don't, then why do you even watch this sport? That I can understand why it would be frustrating, but I saw it as a pretty clear-cut 29-28 for Merab. Here's the problem for me. The difference between 2012 Jose Aldo and 2022 Jose Aldo is that in 2012, Jose Aldo had the best takedown defense in the sport, perhaps the best takedown defense in the history of the sport, and could kick your ass at the same time while effortlessly defending your takedowns. In 2022, he has to choose one or the other. That's pretty much it. I've said a few times, I don't have many words of wisdom, but one take that's dear to my heart is the other half of takedown defense is punishing the guy for trying. Like, if somebody's able to mash you into the cage for an entire round, or is able to shoot 11 or 20 or takedowns on you over the course of a fight, even if they miss out on most of those takedowns, or even if those clinch exchanges don't end up in takedowns, that they were even able to try that doesn't speak well of the defending fighter. Like, effective takedown defense includes punishing them for trying so that they're dissuaded from pursuing that strategy going forward. Merab was perfectly free to pursue this game plan and dare Aldo to stop him. So yeah, it wasn't exciting. And if you were hoping for this last very remarkable bantamweight chapter of Aldo's legendary career to to go on and maybe justify a title shot. It was obviously disappointing, but I didn't see it as that controversial at all. Yeah, Merab had more takedown attempts than Aldo had significant strikes. Scott McCrate says, well said, still pretty impressive that Aldo can hang with top fighters at his age. It is absolutely impressive. Like, I'm one of the people that thinks Aldo is woefully underestimated in discussions of the greatest fighters of all time, like pound for pound. I think he's absolutely one of the 5 greatest fighters ever. And sometimes he sneaks into my top 3. Just, yeah, an unbelievable resume. And we're kind of coming to the end of it, but that's not a sad thing. There's not a whole lot tragic about this. If anything, we've gotten a couple more years of elite level performances out of a guy that would not have been anybody's pick to successfully drop to 135 pounds once the prospects kind of dried up for him at 145. Unbelievable. If Aldo was less tactical, more aggressive, he would have won. He would certainly have had a better chance of winning. We wouldn't have got this. I mean, after talking about our main event, Aldo, either through his own choice or through getting the wrong signals from his corner, basically he got the fight that he bought and paid for. He acquiesced to the outcome of this fight. If he was more aggressive, maybe Merab ends up sitting on his chest and punching him out in the 3rd round. But he has his own chances of winning there, kind of like Edwards did. Yep. Aldo has been one of the best fighters in the world for almost 15 years at this point. And we're talking about weight divisions where longevity is not the rule of the day, where 35 is old, where 35 with the kind of miles that Jose Aldo has on him is ancient. It's truly unbelievable. It's not as though he's making any noises about retiring, so I'm not going to eulogize the guy right now. But I will say this. Of all the fighters I've ever met in person, just either going to events as a fan or in the years, good grief, it's coming up on 5 years now that I've covered this sport professionally, he's the only fighter I've ever been around that exudes that aura that you hear mentioned sometimes about just true legends in sport. I've been around him at 2 different events where, you're doing the whole media experience during the week. You're going to the press conferences, you're going to the car wash style interview things where the fighters are sitting around the edge of the room and you're going around getting your little interviews. And other fighters treat him with a deference that I've never seen before. Just the room gets quiet when Jose Aldo walks in. The best fighters in the world, just like the conversation just drops and everybody kind of looks his way. It's to the point where a couple times I've realized that something was going on before I saw him because just the hubbub just quieted. I've never met Fedor. I've heard that it's a very similar thing, but that's Jose Aldo. He's a legend. Everybody knows it. Fellow fighters, coaches, media members, UFC employees. Yeah, he's earned it. He's earned everything he's got. And yeah, at this point, the last couple of years of his career has been an absolute victory lap. They treat him like he's not just the king of Rio, he's the king of enter name of your town here. What's next for these 2 fighters? Well, there's kind of a wrench thrown in the works here because now that Leon Edwards is your new welterweight champ, Merab Dvalishvili takes the mantle of longest win streak without a title shot in a UFC division, I'm pretty sure. He certainly feels overdue. He's won 7 straight, and it should be 9, frankly. But he just flat out said, I'm never fighting Aljamain Sterling, with Sterling standing 10 feet away from him. Well, so what do we do? Now we have Peter Yan and Sean O'Malley fighting pretty soon. I think Merab should fight Yan no matter who wins that fight. Because thing is, if Yan wins, he's not next in line to take on Sterling. I mean, they've already fought twice. He's technically lost both times. Yan needs to do more. Maybe beating Merab is it. If O'Malley wins, then they're going to rush O'Malley into a title shot. So it looks like Yan needs a dance partner after that fight no matter what. Merab versus Yan is your fight. Let me know if you feel differently, what you would do with Merab next, in the knowledge that it doesn't sound like Merab wants to fight Aljamain Sterling next, even if offered. Also, Let me know what you think should be next for Jose Aldo. To me, this is an easy layup. Dominic Cruz is there. He's coming off a loss. He's not completely washed. If you don't make that legend versus legend fight that would have seemed like a dream in the closing days of the WEC in 2011, what are you even doing here? Like, if you're the UFC matchmaker, what do you do with these two guys? Let me know in the comments. Kyle Johnson says 5 rounds of Merab versus Chito Vera would be interesting. Yeah, it would. I mean, Chito Vera is not Jose Aldo from a takedown defense standpoint. He would probably get taken down, and waiting out Merab does not seem to be a viable strategy. Merab he's on my Mount Rushmore of the best cardio in UFC history. He's right up there. It's him, Colby Covington, Demetrius Johnson. Like, he's in the team photo. So doing a, I don't know, canvas rope-a-dope against him and waiting for him to wrestle himself out, like we might talk about some other fighters on this card, that's not viable. So it's, can Vera catch him coming in with his nasty power? Can Vera, with his surprisingly nifty and aggressive guard game, make Merab uncomfortable on top? Or would Chito just be throwing up subs and sweep attempts from his back while losing rounds? I'm down to see that. But if anything, I think Merab and Vera have done enough to earn, to earn title shots separately. If Merab doesn't want to be next, I hate to put him against Vera and just have him derail the Vera train. Like, let him fight someone like Yanan, who's not immediately in line either, is my thought. Aldo versus Cruz. All kinds of people seem to be in favor of that one. This is an interesting point that Punches and Bunches says, what if Aldo beats Dillashaw and moves up? The way that Merab talked and the way that Aljamain Sterling kind of, smiled and clapped and nodded knowingly makes me think that they might be planning something along these lines. That would be fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, it'd be great to see if Aljamain Sterling could stick together a couple of title defenses at bantamweight, but he wouldn't be undersized at featherweight. He's an interesting matchup for the top level of that division, because right now the top of the featherweight division is very striker heavy. He brings something different there as kind of a small Luke Rockhold, a guy that presents as a kickboxer, but really for most of his career has been more of a kicker and a wonderful like ground fighter. I'd love to see him against some of the top guys in the featherweight division. Merab versus Sandhagen, song winner. If he just wants a paycheck fight, stay busy while Aljamain Sterling figures out what he's going to do, that works for me. Otherwise, that is a lateral move, if not a move down, for someone who's on the kind of streak that Merab is. Like, I'm not saying he shouldn't take it, and I'm not saying the UFC shouldn't offer it, but it should be in full recognition that Merab is accepting this and it's not being forced upon him. I mean, again, his win streak is ridiculous at this point. How do you match the triangle of Cruz, Aldo, and Edgar? I mean, Aldo and Edgar have fought twice now, and Edgar didn't really have a whole lot for him either time. And their second fight, the one at UFC 200, is, in my book, the greatest display of takedown defense in a top level fight, like a championship level fight, probably in UFC history. But there are still other matchups to be made among those three. Definitely closing in on their last fights. It feels to me like Edgar is a little closer to the end of the line than they are. He competed for longer at a higher weight class. These other guys, they didn't have Gray Maynard beating like years off of their lives. And just, Edgar's chin has started to give out more than Aldo or Cruz. Well, maybe not more than Cruz, but at least as much as these other two. Edgar's game has run on kind of like his speed and his gas tank, and both of those seem to be betraying him a little bit at this point. I think Edgar's a step below them. Wonder if Merab could lose muscle and make 125. Kyle Lawheat asks. I don't know. He's not tall, and I'm never going to say never in the wake of TJ Dillashaw making 125, in the wake of who was it that just did it? And Ode Osborne, in the wake of Ode Osborne dropping to 125. I'm never going to say never, but I don't think he needs to. I think it's more likely that Sterling moves up and clears the way for him. Should Aldo go back to featherweight? Competitively, that'd be fine. He didn't leave featherweight because he was getting destroyed. He left because he'd come up against a roadblock. He'd come up definitively short against Holloway and Yan. And I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, not only did both those guys beat me decisively, but they're both a lot younger than me. So if I wait around, I'm never going to get another title shot in this division. One or both of those guys is going to be ahead of me forever. So I think that's what made him decide to move to bantamweight. And honestly, even if he never makes it to a title shot, even if this fight here was as close as he got to it, because I think he would have gotten a title shot had he beaten Merab, you still have to look at it as a good move in hindsight. Like, he dared to be great. Like, what more can you ask of a fighter? Shall we move on from here to the remainder of this card? I think we should. Before that, the 5-fight main card of UFC 278 featured 2 bouts that, frankly, are among the worst fights on paper that have been on a UFC main card in a long, long time. The second of those, the returning Lucie Pudilova versus the probably departing Wu Yanan at bantamweight. I mean, Keith's usually your X's and O's man, but this was a tale of 2 rounds. First round was Pudilova getting takedowns and positional dominance. Second round was Pudilova getting takedowns and positional dominance plus punches. And once she decided to start punching this woman in the face, this shit was over quickly. Lucie Pudilova left the UFC. I think she was like 2-4 or 2-5 in the UFC. She wiped up, went like 4-1 in Octagon MMA to win her way back. She might be a marginally better fighter than she was before, but she's still not top 15 material, even in the extremely depleted women's bantamweight division. She's an okay fighter, and she's physically strong. And when she remembers to be, she has a mean streak on the ground. That was enough to pound out Wu Yanan, just kind of elbowed her to death on the ground. There's not much else to say than that. We'll get to the cut list at the end here. I'm not going to be snarky, probably, and put both of them on there, but this was either going to be Wu Yanan's farewell, or it was going to be the UFC getting some repeat buyer's remorse out of having re-signed Pudilova. I mean, the 135-pound division needs bodies badly, but this ain't it. Pudilova versus Saldana is an underrated UFC banger from a few years ago, says Alan McDonald. I agree. It's a pretty good fight. It was the first glimpses of what Pudilova could be at her best. Again, physically strong, tall for the division. But Mikey says, has there ever been a main card on a pay-per-view with 2 cut list fighters before? I can't remember. This feels unprecedentedly bad. Before Pudilova versus Wu, we had Harry Hunsucker versus Tyson Pedro, the people's main event. Pedro's second fight since returning from his 2 or 3 year layoff. Hunsucker's first fight at light heavyweight. I made the joke on the Sherdog preview that Hunsucker was trying to make an unprecedented run at being the worst fighter in the UFC in 2 different divisions, because he was the worst heavyweight in the UFC. Like, don't get it twisted. I know that it's possible to think of that kind of unranked heavyweight thing as just kind of a cesspool of not good fighters, but even among those guys, Hunsucker, kind of sunk to the bottom. He just wasn't. He's just not a UFC level heavyweight. He's a symptom of what heavyweight looks like, even in the UFC. that has the best heavyweight division in the sport. He's a symptom of what the Dana White's Contender Series signing frenzy brings to the UFC, even though he didn't get signed through the Contender Series. You know, he fought on the Contender Series, lost, and then came back. And it's a sign of what the COVID pandemic reduced the UFC to kind of in 2020, just needing bodies to fill cards. So nothing against Harry Hunsucker, just not a UFC level heavyweight. He dropped to light heavyweight. And for a moment, I actually had a bit of doubt about my Tyson Pedro by first round knockout pick, because Hunsucker, like several other fighters on this card, came out like, yeah, I made the weight and I look fucking good. Tyson Pedro, Luke Rockhold, obviously Jose Aldo's been doing it for a year or two now, but the unlikely or questionable weight cut guys coming out looking like swimsuit models was a theme of the evening. So Hunsucker looked good at 205. And my first thought was, well, if he belongs in the UFC at all, maybe this is the division where he does. But no, Tyson Pedro lit him up. And it's ironically, for a guy who had been a career heavyweight and had been weighing in around 238, 242 pounds, Hunsucker was way smaller than Pedro and slower, and Pedro hit 5 times as hard. About the only interesting thing about this fight was the way it finished. That body kick was nasty. It was that Giga Chikadze thing where his right foot went over and hit the right side of Hunsucker's torso, kind of the cross body liver shot, that Giga kick where the ball of the foot goes right in the liver. Pedro followed up with a couple of punches, but frankly, he didn't need to. Hunsucker looked done for as soon as that kick landed. Nice stuff from Tyson Pedro, and I still have no idea how good Tyson Pedro is. Star power is there for him if he can keep winning. He is a gregarious and likable guy, much like his brother-in-law. I think he and Tai Tuivasa are brothers-in-law, or you know, there's some relative by marriage there. He's got the same just kind of easygoing oceanic charm. His fights are exciting, sometimes to his detriment. I still think his fight with Ovin St. Preux was the most exciting 3 minutes of MMA, you know, in 2018. But I have no idea how good he is. Thus far, he has that one dominant win over Paul Craig that nobody will ever take away from him. And aside from that, he has beaten the bad fighters and he's lost to the okay ones. That's it. I'm still waiting to figure out what Tyson Pedro is, but it's good to have him back. His fights are exciting. He's fun. He gets Laura Sanko to drink beer out of a shoe. How much beer she actually got down is, you know, a fair question to ask. That was a pretty minimal shoey. You guys have seen better shoeys on this show. Yeah. Just floating through, decides to credit UFC matchmakers Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard with a regrettable lapse into good judgment. He says that he thinks it's good that they're bringing Tyson Pedro back slowly instead of throwing him to the wolves. I kind of agree, especially considering that light heavyweight is so wide open, so starved for new contenders. You could at least see them, if not giving him like a top 10 or top 5 guy, at least smashing him up against a fellow fringe guy that needs development, like just putting him against like Kennedy and Nzechukwu or Johnny Walker or something. And like, you know, why smash your toys together? Like, let these guys figure out how to fight on their own against the Harry Hunsuckers of the world first. UFC doing the slow burn with Pedro. Yep, they are. And that's A-okay with me. Alan McDonald corrects me, thinks Ty is married to Pedro's sister or vice versa, as long as they are not married to their own sisters, which is not okay in Australia or the US. I'm all right with it. That's it for the 5-fight main card of UFC 278. Going on from there, let's talk about the fight that was, it seemed to be demoted from the main card at the last minute, the heavyweight matchup between Alexander Romanov and Marcin Tybura. Here's the moment where I'm going to brag on myself for a minute. You guys know that I'm always quick to take all my lumps when I make a terrible call. Tonight, 12 fight card made it out. I went 9-2-1. The one was, of course, the Woodson draw. I got the AJ Fletcher fight wrong. I got the main event wrong, but it was pretty easy to do. It was pretty easy to do well on this card when it was full of like -300 and bigger favorites. One of those minus 300 favorites was Alexander Romanov, minus 325 coming into this. And I said, this is a way out of whack line. And I picked Tybura straight up. And I said, Romanov does not know how to manage his gas tank. He tries high amplitude suplexes that wear him out unnecessarily. He's fighting his first ever top 15 fighter, and he's fighting at altitude. And I said, watch for him to win the first round, gas out badly. I picked Tybura to actually win by third round TKO as Romanov just really, really wilted. Just thinking back to Romanov, frankly, wanting out against, what's his bucket? The old guy from Canary Islands. You know the one I mean. Couldn't have been much more right about this one. I'm not an analyst. Keith is the analyst. Keith is the X's and O's guy. But once in a blue moon, I see a fight really, really clearly. And yeah, this played out exactly that way. Romanov tried 2 high amplitude suplexes. Well, I say try. He succeeded in 2 high amplitude suplexes in the first round. Boss giving me the name under the guise of asking a question. I appreciate you having my back. Juan Espino did retire. But yeah, Romanov gassed out. Tybura started lighting him up on the feet. Tybura got Romanov on the ground, and the second and third rounds were kind of academic. The real question was just whether you gave the first round as a 10-8 to Romanov. I did, and because of that, I actually scored this fight a draw, even though, you know, the scoring system isn't perfect, but I felt like Pride rules style, Tybura probably actually won the fight. But yeah, Tybura ends up picking up the majority decision, 229-28, and one of the official judges did give a 10-8, and that made it 28-28. The ABC, the Association of Boxing Commission's new guidelines that they put out for MMA judges, was it about 2 years ago at this point, where they said 10-8 rounds should be no more than 5% of all rounds, has led to fights like this, where 2 out of 3 judges gave Romanov a 10-9 round on Tybura, even though, you know, Tybura mounted almost no offense. Romanov did quite a bit of damage. Yeah, I mean, that's what the guideline changes have brought us. Tybura trains in New Mexico, so he was used to it. Yep. New Mexico, at least Albuquerque, is the high desert. It's around, 4,000, 5,000 feet. So is Salt Lake. Some of you might not know that while I, obviously hail from Houston, I've spent 15 years in Utah. I think I said that earlier. Yeah, it's not like Breckenridge, Colorado, like 10,000 feet where you're sucking wind, like just getting out of bed and going to the kitchen. But the 4,000 or 5,000 foot altitude, it sneaks up on you. And you can get used to it if you live there for a decade or you grew up there. But if you're coming from, a flat place, and best believe we're going to be talking about AJ Fletcher in a minute. If you're from like a place that's like literally below sea level and is only dry land because of like levees, you can't get used to that in 2 weeks. I know the UFC booth made a big deal about, well, this fighter got here 2 weeks ago. This fighter's been training here for a month. You can't change your lung capacity like that in a matter of weeks. You can't. It takes a year. I see people laying out their picks for who these guys should fight next. Even though I didn't ask, I don't care who they fight next. I'm kidding. I care about whatever you guys want to talk about. Mikey M. Keith isn't here, but he did take the time out of his vacation to like tweet me some congratulations, and I'll be sure to puff myself up the next time we record a preview or a recap together. Okay, so what should be next for these guys? I still think Romanov has more upside than Tybura. I said it on the preview, even as I was picking Tybura. I think Tybura wins this fight on Saturday, but if either of these guys is UFC champ 2 years from now, I am shocked if it's Tybura, where I'm just kind of surprised if it's Romanov. I still feel that way. Romanov has problems, but they're fixable. And he's on his way to fixing them. He's gone from a 260-pound kind of jiggly guy to a 240-pound guy who, I mean, he's getting kind of lean for the heavyweight division, and his athleticism has benefited. He's always been light on his feet for heavyweight, but it's gotten more so. And I don't think his gas tank has to be as bad as it is. He just needs to understand that tripping a guy and using his own weight to dump him over, it gets him to the ground just as efficiently as you hoisting him into the air and making yourself carry his weight. That's, that's just it. That's, Rustam Habilov used to suplex people all over the place, and that was at lightweight, where you should be able to, sustain that for longer. And Carlos Diego Ferreira just kind of waited him out, let him gas out, and then destroyed him. And he did it with the heat of Abu Dhabi instead of the altitude of Salt Lake City. But yeah, fighters can learn this lesson and fix it. Just remains to be seen whether Romanov will. He's very young for a heavyweight. He's got great physical tools. Just needs to change his approach just a little bit. And if he does, it's the heavyweight division. All you need to be a top 10 fighter is one really good tool and the aggression to put it to work. If he wants to become just a great wrestler instead of a flashy wrestler, I mean, he can be Melanin challenged Curtis Blades if he wants. Tybura, he's going to be Tybura forever. He's Melanin challenged Czech Congo. He's going to hang around the edges of the top 10 and give us a mix of okay and terrible fights forever. That's the future of Marcin Tybura. Tybura versus Pavlovich. Kyle Johnson just really wants to see Tybura die. Who was the heavyweight last week who was great at trips? I don't remember last week's fights. I never do. I'm like a goldfish. I'm just kind of circling the bowl, and there's just so much coming through. I mean, I did the Sherdog live play-by-play for the PFL playoffs event this morning, and I've forgotten all of it. I think Kayla Harrison won. I think I would have remembered if she'd lost. That's about it. Oh, boss, way out ahead of me here. We'll get to this. Before that, we had Jared Gordon versus Leonardo Santos. Lightweight matchup. Santos, 42 years old, already a remarkable longevity story that he's even competitive with UFC level lightweights at that age. Lightweight is not a division that really is kind to the elderly. And when a fighter enters kind of their end stage in terms of age, it manifests in different ways. Some fighters, the chin goes, the chin disappears. Obviously, if it's a chin that's taken a lot of abuse over the years, then as they push 40, the chin goes and it's understandable, like your Chuck Liddell types. Sometimes it's the gas tank. Some fighters who normally are reliable cardio machines, that's what goes away. That I feel as though that's starting to happen to people like Clay Guida, people like Frankie Edgar. Leonardo Santos is one of those. His chin hasn't completely disappeared. He's slowed down a bit, but it's not like he hasn't turned into walking in mud, but he used to have a reliably good gas tank, and it's not anymore. Gordon won the first round, and once he won the first round, I thought he probably had the fight in the bag because he was the one that was going to be pulling away going forward. Santos just was getting increasingly desperate on his attempts to bring the fight to the canvas in the second and third rounds. Yeah, gas tanks abandoned him. Where does Leo Santos work on the what could have been meter? That's a really attractive question. And if and when he officially retires, here's the thing. And I know the UFC spoke frequently about his BJJ credentials. They are impressive. He's on the medium short list of most decorated Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners to cross over to MMA in their physical prime. Like, not a guy that, came over as a dilettante in his mid 30s, but someone who actually won 7 Mundials medals and started fighting in MMA at like 24 or 25. He's on the short list, but even before he turned 40, he spent 5 or 6 years as a guy who fought once a year. And that doesn't work. I mean, even if you're Tony Ferguson, that doesn't work. you have to be able to string together enough wins to stay in the consciousness of the matchmakers, of the fans. Uh, the lightweight division is fast moving waters. Other fighters, busier fighters, will pass you up, even if your resume is generally better. If they're busier, they're going to pass you like slow moving traffic on the freeway. So I don't think we missed out on a champ, but I think we missed out on somebody who could have been lightweight Damian Maia, somebody who was just a tough out and a true specialist and a real fun guy to watch for a few years. And I mean, we got that, but just not nearly as much of it as we might have. Chris Wiz, stitching back, did we talk about how the UFC put Wu versus Pudilova on the main fight card when the fighters were 1-4 and 2-5 in the UFC? We did talk about it. It's the worst matchup I can think of between. It's the worst matchup on paper that I can remember on a UFC pay-per-view, where there was no reason for them to be on the pay-per-view other than their MMA accomplishments. We were having another chat in the Sherdog editorial Slack as the fights went on tonight. Who's the worst fighter ever to appear on a UFC pay-per-view card? They threw out CM Punk. I get nervous when we get there because Mike Jackson is a guy I consider a personal friend. And if Punk is number one, then you can argue Jackson's number two, or certainly in the top five. But yeah, people like that, people like James Toney, who are on a UFC pay-per-view card because of their fame from another source, that's different. That, circus sideshow fights, that's fine. I'm a Pride Fighting Championships guy. Your circus sideshow, I'm here for it. But in terms of their own competitive merits, Wu versus Pudilova is probably the worst matchup ever. And Harry Hunsucker is probably like the worst individual fighter ever to appear on a UFC main card. And Hunsucker, I mean, based on the empirical evidence, he may be past Jackson, even just on general merits. He might be right up there with Punk. I mean, Jackson has 2 UFC wins, even if one of them was overturned for weed and the other was thanks to, Dean Barry being a moron. Anything else about Gordon versus Santos? Just feels like Gordon is still a solid mid-card guy for the UFC who might sneak into the top 15 from time to time, whereas Santos is well on his way out. Before that, we had Luis Saldana versus Sean Woodson. Okay, last bit. Alan McDonald throws in Sean Gannon. I would agree, except that, Sean Gannon is in for different fame. He beat, he's the cop who beat Kimbo Slice in a street fight. He cheated by using actual MMA. Luis Saldana versus Sean Woodson. As Chris Wiz points out, 2 fighters tonight thought they got a finish when they had a foul. I'm glad that Keith introduced a new segment for the Shillan and Duffy recap. What is it called? Oh, Dude Seriously. Well, I mean, we might as well just do Dude Seriously right now. Dude, seriously? Luis Saldana gave away this fight to Sean Woodson on a silver platter. He hurt Woodson really bad in the first round. Landed a check hook on him. I want to say it was a left. Drops Sean Woodson. He lets Woodson back to his feet. He lands another, as either a left straight or a left jab. Drops Woodson again. And steps in and knees his grounded opponent in the head. And I don't think Woodson was playing anything up. This was a flush knee right to the dome. Woodson can continue. Saldana gets a point taken away. That's a 9-9 round. And thanks to that, we end up with a split draw. That's as simple as it was. I mean, Woodson pretty clearly won the second round. Saldana won the third round. Saldana gave away that fight in the first round. He probably could have finished Woodson if, instead of goofing around and pointing at the canvas when he knocked him down the first time, he had just dove in and finished him. I mean, dude, you knocked down the better striker. You knocked down one of the best boxers in the division. Just go finish the fucking fight on the ground. Then he knocks him down again and fouls him. Saldana, dude, seriously? Someone teach that man the rules of MMA, because he's got a ton of potential. I favored Woodson in this fight, and frankly, even though it came out a draw, I feel as though I picked this fight wrong. Like, Saldana was the better fighter tonight. He was just dumb and kind of gacked it away. If any of you can think of a bigger brain fart in a UFC level fight this year, I mean, I can only go to Dean Barry landing that hat trick of fouls on Mike Jackson. That's about it. Kyle Lawheat says Woodson needs to move up to 155. He's cutting too much weight, and it affected his ability to take a shot tonight. I kind of agree with you. That's always been my thought since the first time I saw him on the Contender Series. And it doesn't help that on the Contender Series, he got knocked out clean. Just, yeah, he makes the weight, but he's so huge. There's got to be compromises somewhere. It's not possible that his brain case is rehydrating in the, 24, 36 hours he has. He needs to move up to 155, but as long as it kept working, you can't, you got to judge this stuff based on the results to some extent, but here, just another weight cut to 145. Again, fighting at a slightly higher altitude. Just, he wasn't quite as sharp as usual. He lost to a fighter I think is frankly less skilled and less physically gifted. Woodson needs to move up to 155. He will still be the biggest guy in that division. I mean, the only guy who's going to be even close is Jalen Turner, and I feel as though they're about the same size. Yep. Woodson looked weak and his punches had no effect. That's pretty much it. I mean, Woodson's not a one-shot knockout artist, but normally he has stinging power where, kind of like Max Holloway, when he lands 2 or 3 in a row, you can tell the guy doesn't like it, and his game plan is changing, and he's taken out of his comfort zone. That's the kind of snap Woodson has, and tonight he did not have it. Saldana had more power and was better able to take a shot. Again, Saldana was the better fighter tonight and has to leave with a draw when he could have had a win. Yuck. Prior to that, AJ Fletcher versus Ange Loosa at welterweight. I called this one wrong. I called this one dead wrong. I mean, I got a couple of fights wrong. I got the Usman fight wrong, but I was right until there was about 50 seconds left, and then I was really, really wrong. I'll take that. I'll take that all day, because the basic dynamic of the fight, they played out about like I thought. This fight, it did not. I expected Fletcher's wrestling to be more effective than it was. Kyle, Fletcher has to have some of the shortest arms in the welterweight division. He doesn't look that short, but he's sort of compact. He's got that, like he's just all torso and jacked, and his arms are short. And it showed against Loosa. Loosa was able to kind of keep him on the edge of his punches, but that didn't figure to matter because I thought Fletcher would shoot an easy double leg within the first 60 seconds of the fight and then just smash Loosa on the ground and probably get takedowns in all 3 rounds on the way to winning a one-sided decision. Loosa was effective wrestling defensively. He was effective when he went for takedowns himself, and his gas tank was much better than Fletcher's. There's only so much that you can credit to the altitude. Yeah, it's 4,000, 4,500 feet above sea level, but there's an NBA team there. There are several, top 25 college football teams. Athletes do perform in Salt Lake City. It's not fucking Tibet. Part of Fletcher's gas tank problem has got to be how much muscle he's carrying on his frame, and a bit of that Romanov type. I get my takedowns with brute force rather than making technique work for me. But he's not a heavyweight. 170 is not kind to people without a gas tank. Just, look at the people at the top of that division. Look at the people at the top of 170. Most of them can wrestle, and almost all of them have very good cardio. That's going to be a problem for Fletcher. Like, think of the trio of undefeated prospects that are rocketing up the ranks right now. Shamaev, his name, the guy in the big Ushanka hat, Shavkat Rachmanov, and Sean Brady. All three of them, very good wrestlers. All three of them. I mean, Brady, I think it's going to catch up to him at some point, but all three of them, at least so far, their cardio has been fine. Like Fletcher, he's not going to be able to merge into traffic in this division with that gas tank. And that's a shame because I think I said this on one of the previews. Like, I went and saw him in Lake Charles, Louisiana, just over the border from me for his second pro fight. Like, I saw him go 2-0. And I remember, like, taking a phone picture of him for his Fight Finder photo and kind of giving his coach, didn't even have a manager at the time. He was a 22-year-old kid with one fight, just gave him my card and said, hey, if he books his next fight anywhere other than Fury or LFA, where I know I'll hear about it, like, just kick me a text and let me know about it, because I saw that much upside in him. But yeah, he's hit a wall, and yeah, that wall is his own cardio. The rest of it, even his kind of compact stature, that can all be overcome. Johnny Hendricks won a title with some of the shortest reach in the division. In fact, at his best, like his ceiling, I thought Fletcher could be kind of a poor man's Hendricks, a guy that just used shockingly explosive takedowns to both get fighters, on the ground or keep them afraid of the takedown and set up his striking, that overhand right fastball that wrestlers love. Not much else to say about that one. I mean, Loosa had a smart game plan. I agree. Swiss people, they put together their watches and their game plans with precision, I guess is what we learned from this. Spike Carlisle 2.0. I like that, because what was Spike Carlisle's thing? He was ridiculously jacked for the division and fought at a furious pace that was fun to watch, and generally won him the first round of every fight, but was not built. It wasn't built to last. He just burned way too much energy. He could win a first round against Bill Algeo without blowing his gas tank like he did. Like, great comparison. The exact approach is a little different, but yeah, needless expenditure of energy is the order of the evening for both AJ Fletcher and Alexander Romanov, I guess. Before that, Amir Albazi versus Francisco Figueiredo. Amir Albazi is a very good flyweight. Francisco Figueiredo is not. That's it. Francisco Figueiredo, he looks like a palette swapped Davis and Figueiredo. Like, they look as similar as, Scorpion and Sub-Zero, where you can tell it's like basically the same dude, just they put a different color palette on him. But Figueiredo this Figueiredo just isn't that good. There's nothing he does as well as his brother. Like, he has the same basic approach, doesn't throw as fast or hard. He wants to grapple, but against a guy like Albazi, he was a step behind the entire time. Punches and Bunches says zero head movement. I am not sure whether he's talking about Francisco Figueiredo or AJ Fletcher, because it's the case for both of them. Alan McDonald wants to move on to the next fight because that's pretty much it. Amir Albazi, again, is, even in a division where it's as crowded at the top as men's flyweight is right now, with just so many good fighters kind of circling, he's going to be one of the next guys to kind of butt his way into the conversation, I'm sure. Chris Wiz giving us some breaking news. Tony Ferguson versus, I hope that leech is Li Jingliang. Not, who's the other leech? The featherweight guy from LFA. I'm terrible with names. Like, my brain has just died in the last 10 years. I don't think I'm having strokes, but I just cannot remember people's names. Anyway, Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang. That is surprisingly not depressing. If El Kukui wants to fight, I like that fight. I like welterweight for him. I like Li Jingliang as somebody that's not an insulting matchup for maybe one of the greatest UFC fighters never to win an undisputed title, but isn't just going to get him slaughtered. Like, it's not Ferguson versus Shavkat Rakhmonov or something. Boss, do you want to be my unpaid intern? Because you were just feeding me the names. Thank you. Oh, Tony versus Lee on September 10th. September 10th is my birthday and Crow Cup's birthday, and we both approve. I think Crow Cup approves. Yeah, James Scott says he wants to see Ferguson at 170. Well, you were about to see Ferguson at 170. That works for me. Again, he's clearly getting old, but in ways that are made worse by dehydration. We just saw him get knocked out clean in a way we'd never seen before. We're seeing him get out hustled and out cardioed and bullied on the ground in a way that we had never really seen before. Whatever he's got left competitively, I like it better at 170. Oh, second from the bottom, we had Shillan versus Jay Perrin. Not going to lie. Like I said, I did the PFL playoffs play-by-play for Sherdog, and that ended with post limbs about 45 minutes before the UFC card started. So I caught a quick nap and then woke up right at the end of the Shillan versus Perrin fight and kind of went through those first two fights in a hurry, kind of skipping the interstitials and bullshit. But what I saw was Shillan outstruck Jay Perrin pretty soundly on the feet. He's longer, fast hands, throws straight punches, just kind of lit him up on the feet. Perrin tried a couple times to get things to the ground, but didn't really succeed until the third round. And that round he won. Just seemed like a decent bantamweight fight where Shillan is the better prospect of the two. That's about it. First fight of the night, Victor Altamirano versus Daniel Lacerda. Last week, I kind of eulogized, gave an elegy even to my man Charlie Ontiveros, saying that, the guy's fighting with his back against the wall, knows he's probably fighting for his job. What's he do? He comes out with an axe kick in the first 5 seconds. That, to a lesser extent, was the case for Daniel Lacerda as well. 0-2 in the UFC, going for his third try, and he fought aggro, and he had Victor Altamirano in some trouble early. I thought he was going to, keep his job and then some, maybe restore some of his prospect shine with a finish over a slightly more touted prospect in Altamirano, but Altamirano recovered, got Lacerda to the ground, and then just jackhammered him with standing to ground punches. Altamirano just bigger, and if not better, at least as good. Lacerda, not a UFC fighter. Well, you may be literally correct in a couple days here, but he hasn't shown much. He hasn't shown much upside. He hasn't shown much to show that he belongs. About the only thing you can say in his favor is that he is very young and he's only had access to top level coaching for a couple of years at this point. But it's a fallacy to say that just because a fighter is young, that they're automatically going to be better in 2 or 5 or 8 years. Sometimes a fighter is as good as they're going to be at 22 or 25 or 26 after 10 fights. Like, not every fighter continues developing for their whole career. Not every fighter is Charles Oliveira. Not every fighter is Fabricio Verdum. Not every fighter is Dustin Jacoby, who looks miserable, goes and does something completely different for 5 years and comes back and is all of a sudden a top 10 fighter. Sometimes fighters just are what they are. And there's a possibility that Daniel Lacerda, he's a future FC / jungle fight level fighter, and he's just not a UFC guy, despite kind of looking the part as a pretty athletic and muscular little dude. That may be it. That's it. That's your 12 fight lineup for UFC 278, Usman versus Edwards 2. Let's get to the fun stuff. But first, I have to ask Mikey a question. When you say that Victor Altamirano doesn't look 31, are you saying that he looks older or younger than that? Okay, let's get to the cut list. While I'm waiting for that. Oh, okay. Mikey says younger. Yeah. Yeah. I think it depends on the lighting because in some lighting, he has this really severe face and looks like a gargoyle. And then other times it's like, yeah, dude, you look 25. Like what's your secret? You got some of that Paulo Costa secret sauce. I don't know. Let's go to the cut list. For those of you who are new to the Shillan and Duffy show, the cut list is normally Keith and me saying, if we were in charge of the UFC roster, whom would we cut? Not predicting whom the UFC will cut because otherwise Sam Alvey would have been gone like literally 2 years ago. Just saying. So throw out there, based on performances tonight, whom you would cut from the UFC. Keep in mind, it's not a bad thing. It sounds mean to say that fighter A is not UFC material, but there are fighters laboring out in the sticks of Dagestan and Houston and Northeastern Brazil who are UFC material and will never get a chance unless we cut these people. The Contender Series is in full swing. I did last week's play-by-play, and Dana signed all 5 winners. Somebody's got to make room for these folks. So whom would you cut? Throw them out there. I'll throw out mine. Daniel Lacerda, time to go. I just said that it doesn't mean a whole lot that he's young, but it does mean that he's got time to go somewhere else and get more fights under his belt and maybe see if he is still a developing product. Let him do it. Francisco Figueiredo keeps his job for now. AJ Fletcher keeps his job for now. I'd let Leonardo Santos go. I'd let Harry Hunsucker go. If my math is correct, I think he has one more fight on his deal, probably. But at this point, Hunsucker has fought 5 UFC level fighters, like 3 fights in the UFC, his 1 fight on the Contender Series, and fighting Don'Tale Mayes back in Kentucky. He has yet to make it past like 3 minutes and 15 seconds with any of them. So, like, he is the definition of not UFC material. Hunsucker can go. I think Yanan needs to go. Luke Rockhold retired. Otherwise, I would call for the UFC not to offer him any more fights, just for his own good. That's it. That's my cut list. Here's and I'm going to throw some of these up here. Keep Santos and feed him to prospects. I'm okay with. I'd be okay with that. He's gotten kind of hurt in his last couple of fights. I think if they don't watch it, he's going to end up on one of those runs where he just gets knocked out cold a couple fights in a row, like smelling salts level. So we'll see. Perrin lost his Contender Series fight, lost both his 2 UFC fights. Well, if he was Harry Hunsucker, that would just mean it's time to drop another weight class and get one more fight. But it's weird that after saying what I just said about Daniel Lacerda, I look at Jay Perrin and I'm like, yeah, but he's showing some signs of life in his fights. I think he might have a win, down in there somewhere he can pull out. But no, Chris Wiz talking sense into me. You guys can tell that when Keith and I are both on, he's always the butcher, and I'm kind of like the angel of mercy. I think I got everybody's up here. My apologies if I missed any of yours. Next up, the Bulls and the Bears. That is, of course, stock market reference. Bulls are up, Bears are down. We do them 3-2-1 from the least to the most extreme, hockey style. Throw out. Let's do the Bulls first. Let's get positive. 3 people, places, things, ideas whose stock is up after tonight's card. Throw out what you got. My Bulls, Marcin Tybura, on a night full of 3-1, 5-1, 9-1 favorites. Tybura was the only serious. Well, Tybura and someone else that we'll get to in a minute were the only ones of those serious underdogs that stepped up and won their fights. That's a stock up moment. Handing one of the UFC's most promising UFC heavyweight prospects his first career loss. That's a good look. Marcin Tybura, stock up for the time being. He'll never be the most exciting guy to watch. Like, not only does KSW not want this guy, I don't know if, like, maybe Poland is even picking up his passport and telling him to stay here in the U.S. Because, yeah, he does not deliver KSW levels of violence, but he did deliver a win over Alexander Romanov. So he is definitely a bull. Number 2 bull, Ange Loosa. Beat AJ Fletcher, beat him in a way I did not predict or expect. He beat Fletcher where I figured Fletcher would have the advantage. Welterweight's an incredibly crowded division. I know it's arguable whether it's the best division in the sport. I won't even make that case, but I do still think it's the hardest division in the sport in the UFC to break into the top 10, let alone into the title picture. So he's got a long way to go before that, but his stock is definitely up. He's proven he belongs, where if Fletcher beat him convincingly, like, he's not on the cut list yet, but he's kind of sneaking. Number 1, how could it be anything else? Neither Keith nor I very often call out the main event, but when you notch one of the most shocking title upsets in UFC history, you do it by cleanly knocking out a fighter who'd never been knocked out before. You got to, I mean, you got to be the bull. He's going to be one of the bulls of the year. Like, whatever he does from here on out, if they rematch before the end of the year, great. If they don't, I mean, he's still got a case for your fighter of the year. What a performance for this man. Some bulls. Let's see if we got any bulls that I didn't mention. Oh, bulls, Rocky Edwards and Justin Gaethje for winning at the Game of Life. That's, hey, go get yours, Justin. Excellent. Bulls. Kyle Johnson has the same as me, slightly different order. Mikey M, Bear, Hamzat first gets fed Nate, now has to wait for this rematch, and the clock is ticking on him being able to even cut to 170. I agree that Hamzat Chimaev, Shavkat Rakhmonov, and probably Sean Brady are among your biggest losers of the evening. Like, whoever comes out of the Brady versus Muhammad fight victorious, they just saw whatever their next thing is pushed back by probably 6 months. So completely agree. Because what if Usman wins a real close fight the next time? Like, it's a split decision or something. You know? So you've got Usman with 2 competitive decisions and Leon with 1 just knockout. Things, do we end up with another quadrilogy? Oh, shoot me now. Chris Wiz, Bulls, Rocky, Salt Lake City, and MMA, LOL. I love MMA. And I love things that make me LOL. And if MMA LOL was a sport, Paulo Costa and Luis Saldana definitely delivered some of it tonight. So I'm totally on board with that. Good night for Salt Lake City. You know, at least it ended excitingly. Bulls, Edwards with one of the best head kicks you'll ever see. Tybura, Costa looking in decent shape. And yeah, grappling, trying subs, grappling, able to take care of himself against a supposedly better grappler in Luke Rockhold. Agree. Technical Wealth agrees with Loosa. Chris Wiz, throw in Pedro. He did well. I mean, Pedro was the biggest favorite on the card. He was pushing a 10-1 favorite. He was like minus 900 on some books. So when you're an inconsistent and wild but promising light heavyweight and you're taking on, like, again, maybe the worst fighter on the roster, a 1-minute knockout is kind of expected, but hey, this is an inconsistent sport and he delivered what was expected. You get something for that. Bulls, Jamaica, wiping noseblood all over opponents and the welterweight division. Yes, while this was not a great night for some of the people that are on the fringes waiting to see what happens with the title picture, for the division overall, this is a good and exciting thing. The UFC welterweight division did not get better when George St. Pierre left, but it sure got more interesting, didn't it? These will be interesting times. Bulls, Pedro, Tybura, Leon. Yes, the nosy bloodbath was awesome and revolting. Yes, Leon, number 1 bull, again, of the year, perhaps, once it's all said and done. Bears, Technical Wolf already out ahead of me. Bears, of course, the three things whose stock is down. Aldo never adjusting. You got to throw it to between kind of Aldo and Didi Pederneiras. He's basically the only head coach Aldo's ever had. He's been Aldo's coach since he was 17-year-old kid. They should have a rapport where he can tell him the truth. Pederneiras had to know that Aldo did not win that second round. So letting him go out and just kind of do the same thing the next round. Yeah, bad look for all of them. I agree. Romanov showboating while losing. Not a good look either. AJ, I need tomato cans. Fletcher, it is beginning to look that way. Bear is a related Bear. The super fight that would have happened between an Usman that hadn't lost in a decade and Hamza will never have quite the same cachet now. Yeah. Yep. It's if Usman comes back and splatters Edwards, the fight still has some sizzle. But yeah, I agree. It's lost something now that it'll never get back. For those of us that, waited for Fedor versus Crow Cop and still got it and it was still pretty awesome, we'll live. MMA will survive. But yeah, we did lose something tonight. Cancel the Salt Lake City card. I was happy to see Salt Lake sell out the arena. Dana said he would come back next year. I hope he does. Like I wish Salt Lake well. Like shout outs to the woman on Twitter who took me to task because I tweeted, watch out Tyson Pedro because Utah loves Polynesians but does not like swearing. And she sent me in caps, you know nothing about Utah. And I had to tell her I lived there for 15 years. And while I left in 2016, I still visit every year. So I know about it. I was also kind of joking. Tyson Pedro delivered the only fast-acting finish on the card. Yep. Bears, according to Dana White, it would be Merab. I mean, my biggest Bears on the night are definitely Aldo in his corner. Francisco Figueiredo, I think we're kind of, at this point, we're past the point. He's not even Antonina Shevchenko at this point. Antonina Shevchenko, it turns out, yeah, she's kind of a straight ahead roster quality flyweight, whereas Francisco Figueiredo may not even be that. So bad night for him. Could go with anybody on our lengthy cut list. Romanov taking the first loss of his career as a 3-1 favorite, no less. That's a bad look. But Luis Saldana, is my biggest Bear of the night. He had in his sights probably the best win of his career, gacked it away and gets a draw instead. It reminds me of, you remember the draw between Nico Price and Donald Cerrone, where I think it was actually Goddard, raised both their hands and Cerrone looked dejected and Nico Price looked delighted. It's kind of the inverse of that. Saldana should be depressed at this draw and Woodson should be happy and relieved. Dre pops in out of nowhere. Usman getting folded and cooked again in rematch. If that happens, if they get a rematch and that happens again, make sure to come back and tell us about it. I have no idea whom I would favor in a rematch right now. This is, to me, this headliner was not Nunes versus Pena, where I was like, you know what? If they fight again a month from now, I think Nunes figures out a way to win this. I'm not as sure about that here. I saw a couple things happen to Kamaru Usman tonight that I never saw before. I saw him get taken down cleanly. I saw him give up dominant positions on the floor in a way he had not against even more decorated grapplers like Gilbert Burns. And of course, I saw him get knocked out cold. So yeah, lots of stuff to think about. Mike, yeah. Costa versus Strickland. Oh my goodness. That would be comedy gold. Let's wrap this up. What grade do you give this card? I'll jump right out and say, I'm not happy raining on the parade, but obviously when they're asking for your money, especially when they're asking for $75 of your money every month, you have the right to expect a higher quality product. You have the right to ask, okay, what are you delivering to me that is worth $75, let alone 3 hours of my time? This card had 3 inexplicable fights on the pay-per-view main card. There were 5 fights, and 3 of them made not a lick of sense. Pedro versus Hunsucker, Pudilova versus Wu, and Costa versus Rockhold. Costa versus Rockhold ended up being a whole hell of a lot of fun, but you can't judge these things strictly on the results. I mean, if all you care about is sloppy blood and guts, go to World Star and watch for free. 95% of those fights end in a knockout, and about 50% of them end with the sound of police sirens in the background. It'll be your favorite promotion. You have the right to expect higher quality than that from the best promotion on earth when they're asking for your money. This card had two real worthwhile fights that we were asked to pay $75 for. We learned a lot from the Merab versus Jose Aldo fight, even if like it wasn't pure excitement from start to finish, and a pedestrian main event became sublime thanks to that last second finish. But that's still pretty thin offerings for a pay-per-view in 2022. I give this card a C-, and I feel like I'm being a little charitable even with that. That's it. That is the Duffy all alone, not Shillan and Duffy recap for UFC 278. I appreciate you folks stepping up and helping me with this. The live chat has become much more live over the last month or two than it has been, for the year before that. Yet it's still our OGs here. It's people that have been here since the beginning. Technical Wealth, Alan McDonald, Kyle Lougheed, Higher Low's been here for a long time at this point. Scott McCrate's been here since the beginning. Chris Wiz, I like that it's still the same people. And tonight, without a co-host, it would have been me quacking into the void. Otherwise, I probably would have quit after like 40 minutes. Instead, you made this one of my most enjoyable evenings of doing these recaps. So I am going to completely chicken out and say all of you are my most valuable posters for the evening. And thank you very much. There's no UFC event next weekend. Then the weekend after that, the UFC's in Paris for Gane versus Tuivasa. I will be doing the preview for that one with a special guest that I do already have lined up. So that won't be me quacking into the void, and look for that to go up overnight, Sunday to Monday of fight week. Between now and then, thanks again for watching. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your weekend off from following this sport that abuses us so horribly.